So what traumatized people can do all by themselves to help themselves, and what do you do to treat trauma patients last 15 years?
Well, I'm going to start out, with what I do,
Right.
because in explaining that, it gives you some idea of, how you could get help for this problem. So, my favorite technique, I guess you could call it, is rewiring, because as this memory is stored and the behavior that follows it, right, you are building a neurological network, right? So you're firing neurons in the body, the nerves and all, and like a thought has a neural pathway.
Yes.
So the more you use it, the more stronger it becomes.
Like
right?
habits.
Like a habit. Right? It's like building the muscle, right? If you're working the muscle, it's going to get stronger. If you don't work the muscle, it's going to get smaller. Okay?
Yes.
So, so the rewiring technique is actually using that natural process we talked about earlier, where during deepest part of sleep and rapid eye movement, right? So we stimulate that, or you could almost say we trick the mind into doing that natural process while the person's awake. So very simply is, right, all I need to do is get a person to focus, talk about it for a little while. Then it comes to the surface, right? And then I use an eye movement, using my fingers basically. I have them watch my fingers, and I'm mimicking, they're following my fingers in basically the same type of pattern that happens during deep sleep. So what happens when you do that, and this is interesting because you've done, this with me, so I have personal experience as well.
I do.
So once the process begins, right, all of a sudden you're following the eye movement, you're concentrating on that, but you have all these memories coming up to the surface. And all those memories are connected to the original trauma. Right? And so the key is not to lock onto it, because as we're doing that, once we start the process, we're already changing the memory. We're processing the memory.
We are moving the memory from temporary file to, daily file, so it gets older, that memory. That's our aim here.
Exactly. So, it's like, you're riding on a train, right?
But again, if a patient, focus on or stuck in one of the memories comes when we do rewiring technique, then because they don't follow your finger anymore. They just
they locked onto another memory.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so then what I do,
we remind them,
Absolutely.
Follow my finger.
Follow my finger, we refocus them, because what you want, it's like you want to be on the train.
Yeah.
You're on the train and the scenery is going by. That's what you want, right? You don't want to lock on to something specific, because then now you interrupt the whole process. So yeah, we have to refocus them.
Yeah.
Now I'll do this for a while, and then I'll be quiet for a moment. I'll just sit here quietly, and I'll give them a chance to kind of stop thinking normal again, because we disrupt the whole pattern of thinking, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I'll say, ask them what's on their mind, and anything that usually pops up or that they start talking about is very related to the
original
trauma. So then, let's say it's a different memory. So then I have them focus on that, right? And then, again, I do the eye movement for some time and take a break. And then more things will come up. And what we end up doing is going all the way back in time to the original trauma, and once you do that, game over, it's finished.
It usually doesn't take more than 15 minutes to 60 minutes. Not if not PTS. PTS sometimes,
simple
takes more time.
Simple traumas, what I mean by simple traumas is when it's a single event.
Yes.
You could almost do that, literally in one session.
Yes.
Now here's the thing. So after you're done and you've felt that, you're going to see certain things. A person's going to be very relaxed. They're going to have their skin color back. They're going to be smiling. They're going to be, you know, you'll see a change in them energetically.
They
They're
even
not stressed.
sometimes say, I can't think of anything now. And they have a smile on their face and they say, I can't think of anything now. Because, you know, you ask, what's on your mind now? This is the treated trauma.
Absolutely. I love that. That's what I look for. I see a smile, I'm like, okay, we're done. But here's the thing. So now after the session, right, you know, they don't understand what happened, right? And there's an integration process that takes place after the therapy. So therapy is still continuing after they leave the office, because we literally rearrange things sort of in their mind, and now the mind has to put that, integrate or file it in the appropriate place. And that could take a few hours to literally a few days or a few weeks to really fully understand how much you've changed. And they're like, okay, then they want homework. What should I do? You know, and I'm like, you don't have to do anything, because once you relieve the trauma, you go back to your true state. So your behavior will change automatically.
Yes.
And you might not notice at first, but your friends will. They'll say, oh, you look different somehow, you know? So usually I like to wait, you know, 3 or 4, you know, weeks and see where they're at. And if they're fine, when they usually are, then, you know, that's the end of it. Now, sometimes in like complex trauma, where they've had, like, because in the average lifetime, the average person has anywhere from 10 to 20 unprocessed memories that are running how we think, behave, and act.
Yes.
You know? So, you know, almost everyone has it, but what makes the difference is some people could function with all that, and right, I mean, we could always improve, but you know, they usually don't seek treatment because they, you know, they think it's normal life. You know what I'm saying? It becomes a problem when it affects you, like on your daily life.
So let's say people cannot reach to health facility or specialist for a period of time. What can they do at home to help themselves a little bit more, you know, in their daily life?
Well,
let's say they cannot sleep, they're stuck in a thought.
Well, okay, then basically you have to do distraction techniques, really. Or, for example, if you can't sleep, your mind's busy, you start focusing on your breathing, like we taught the last program, the 7-11 breathing. Well, that's very helpful in calming the body again. There's a lot of techniques that you can do that will change your state. It doesn't solve the problem, right?
But temporarily gives you relief.
It gives you relief. You know, breathing is one of them. Walking, a hobby, you know, just putting your attention elsewhere. Because as you do that, your mind may wander back, but you bring it back, right? Now you're changing, you know, or you're breaking the cycle, you know.
Sometimes writing, you know,
writing
over and over again, the same event. So they see how their mind see the different aspects of the same event.
Writing is therapeutic all in itself, because when you're writing, you're accessing a different part of the brain.
Yes.
Okay? So you move from like primitive brain, when you're thinking about it, you know, all you're doing is reliving it. You're not doing anything with it. It's just, it's like a feedback. It's like watching a movie over and over and over and over again. Nothing gets resolved. Right? But when you write your feelings and you start writing, you're moving to a different part of the brain. I think it's like the frontal lobe, right? Where you're consciously aware. And so that's a process at the same time, because as you write your feelings and express and all that, now you're actually in a form of processing the memory on your own. So that's very helpful. And you know, you have all that written down. When you do, if you do need to go to a therapist, then you have a lot of things right there. So that prepares you to you know, for even a better session. You know what I mean? Now, sometimes, and this is you know, sometimes though, it's so hard to talk about, right? And this is why I like rewiring. So sometimes you're going to need to get a little bit of help. But I remember having one client who had a very traumatic personal experience, right? And she just could not talk about it at all, literally talk about it at all. And so all I did was get her to focus on that.
Just remember in detail,
and then I would do the eye movement, and I would do the same process, right? I worked with her, I think I did 3 or 4 sessions, and I never knew what the actual trauma was, but she got better.
She got better.
You know what I mean?
So rewiring technique is working very well.
So it really works well, but there are other techniques, and we're going to cover them in the future, but you know, see, there's a mind-body connection. Okay, so it's not only stored in the brain, right, but your body's also affected. So it affects your physical health.
Yes,
So, in fact, what they're learning now is that behind almost every illness is an emotional cause, some sort of, you know, traumatic event, basically.
Yeah.
So there are other therapies that will help release the trauma, because if you release it, whether mentally or in the physical body, you release it. So there's things like emotional freedom technique, where you're working with the meridian system of the body. It's an energy system that
And they can do all by themselves once
could do
they
all by
learn
themselves.
at home to help themselves and also family members or close friends
Absolutely.
as well.
And we'll be covering that in other programs,
Yeah.
showing people how to do it exactly. But, you know, we're in an age where, like, you know, information is at our fingertips, the
That's right.
internet. So you start looking at something like emotional freedom technique, you could get everything you need to know to get started.
Even body drumming, you know, they can do at home. Maybe another program we can show body drumming on each other. So it's a great release technique. Of course, rewiring is primo. You know, very short time you can release the worst traumas. But you know, we can teach them techniques that they can use at home with their family members, friends, and can help them till they reach the health facility. If I let you, I'm sure you're going to talk about trauma till tomorrow morning, because that's your topic. You love it, and you're very successful trauma releasing. I understand, but what do you say? How do you want to wrap up?
Well, actually, one more story,
All right.
if I may, because, you know, rewiring can actually be done, you know, by an individual. You know what I mean? So you want to learn more about it, but I remember one time, and you were there, we were on the way to London, and we're sitting there on the tarmac waiting, right? And I had this intense panic attack on the plane, right? And I was like, you know, the air was flowing. I remember shutting off the airflow, which didn't make sense to me, but I was like, you know, I'm having a panic attack. I was literally going to run out the door.
I know,
You know
I know,
what I mean?
I remember it very well.
And you told me, you said, do EFT, you know, because, you know, sometimes you forget. So I started doing EFT, right? And within 2 minutes, I was fine. But then I was really curious what triggered it. And so I remember the whole flight to London, I'm doing literally rewiring by myself. So I picked 2 points, right? The edge of this chair and the edge of that chair. And I'm just like going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And all this stuff is coming up. And I went through memories where when I was in the military, right, they used to move us from place to place, and these, you know, we would be squeezed into the trucks.
Yeah, like
and then
sardines.
I moved to another when I was a child, and I was like, you know, trapped in a car with everyone on top of me. It was a game we were playing, and so I was able to clear that trauma, and then I knew everything that triggered it at the same time. So, you know, the cure, and I'm going to say cure for trauma, because, you know, there's some schools of thought that says, you know, it can't be, you know, there's no cure, but that's not true.
No.
And there are many things that you can do to manage, you know, trauma.
Of
You know?
course.
So, yeah, I'm going to end it here today.
Okay.
You know, because, again, everything we talk about, the panic attack, by the way, is a trauma all in itself. So each topic will kind of like really expand on each other, and we'll be offering solutions that not only apply for, like EFT could apply for panic attack, it apply applies for trauma. It could apply for
Depression.
any emotion.
Yeah.
So
So can we say that we are building here a puzzle, bit by bit, pieces by pieces? So after a couple of programs, they can see the whole picture and get their head cleared about how they can help themselves.
absolutely, that's exactly what we're doing.
So it's today, and bye for now.
Just one thing, we appreciate your any comments, questions. If there's any topics you want us to talk about, contact us. I believe it's done through WhatsApp. Or let us
Yeah.
know, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. In the meantime, you have a fabulous day, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ophelia Cabral.
And I'm Thomas Cabral.
Welcome to Healthful Living.
It's good to be here.
Today's topic is trauma, and Thomas's trauma expert, I can say, because he's working on trauma releasing last 15 years, and I prepare some questions to understand trauma very easily. How we know that we are traumatized and how we can release it. If you like, Tom, we start. What is trauma?
Well, trauma is just a very distressing, a very disturbing event that is, or experience that is so out of the norm of life. It's so unexpected. It's so shocking, really.
Like out of ordinary.
Out of ordinary. And it leaves the person feeling like a total loss of control. They feel so powerless, so helpless. They're just lost.
They didn't know what to do because it was so unexpected.
That's
in the
correct.
flow of life. You know, we don't expect like traffic accident or losing someone we love, but it happens.
That's right, and it's a shock to the system, really. And there's different kinds of traumas, right? There's the obvious trauma that we know as like big traumas, and they're like, you know, earthquakes, natural disasters. It could be a major car accident. I mean, these are very significant events that we all could relate to. But there's another class of trauma that some people call small trauma, but in essence they're really not, because they have the same intensity as big trauma. And those are the things that involve life changes. Because when we, as human beings, when things change, we tend to fear change. And so it's moving to another country. Like for me, coming to Turkey, it was a beautiful thing, but there was a culture shock. And the life that I knew in America, and the life was so different than the life I was experiencing here in Turkey.
I remember 1999 earthquake in Turkey, in Izmir, and after that event, I remember lots of people came with panic attack, depression, and anxiety disorder. And if it happens again, fear, insomnia, so many. And also, recently we had earthquakes, and it's like, when your life goes on, suddenly your life is not the same as before. So I think it gives people like, oh, what am I going to do now? Nothing is under my control.
Exactly. The key right there, you said it, is complete loss in control. And that just puts you at a very powerless state. Now, what's really important to understand is that the traumatic memory, is actually an unprocessed memory. In other words, here's what happens with normal trauma. We have daily traumas all the time, but for the most part, we get upset and then we move on. We process it. We process it through talking about it with a supportive family, with friends, discussing it, thinking about it. And also, there's a natural healing process that the mind and body goes through during the deepest part of sleep. So during the deepest part of sleep, you're in a delta wave, a delta frequency, right? Your brain waves are really, really slow.
Rapid eye movement, part of the
in that state is usually when you're doing dreaming and that rapid eye movement, right? Yes. Your eyes are just moving super fast. And what's happening through, like, the dreams are somewhat metaphoric. They might seem similar to the events of the day, or they might be completely different, but they represent that negative event that happened during the day.
The feeling.
Everything, the whole experience, right? And trying to make sense out of it and trying to learn from it. Because once a memory is learned, it goes to, past memory, and it stays, it doesn't affect you. Okay, so this is why people can have negative things happen to them, a bad event, and they're fine, a couple days later, a week later. But in the event of something that's really so shocking and unexpected, right, your mind doesn't know where to put the information, because it never happened before. It never had to deal with it before, so you have no idea how to cope with it. So, and this takes place actually in the primitive part of the brain, right? The subconscious part of the brain, particularly the hippocampus.
Yes.
It's sort of like, as a protective mechanism, it takes that information or that memory and it kind of like
encapsulates
it, okay, to protect you from it. That's why some people will have a really bad trauma and they can't remember it.
Yes.
Okay, they have no recollection of it, and that's a protective mechanism. So in essence, right, trauma is a natural response to an abnormal event.
Yes.
Okay.
So, let's say, we saw so many patients like that. They have traumas when they are 3-4 years of age, and they don't remember it because it encapsulated it to protect them. So how in life they can know that they are traumatized? Or how can we say this person is traumatized?
Well, basically, by the way you feel, you know, mostly by the way you feel. And so the traumas that happen very young, you know, affect our behavior for the rest of our life. So then we have, you know, you might notice a pattern of negative type behavior. But the very obvious ones are emotions like, you know, feelings of deep sadness, anxiety, anger, right? Depression, you know, you're exhausted.
And you don't know why.
You don't know why.
Especially if you don't know, if you don't remember the trauma, you don't know why you're depressed. You don't know. Yeah.
Well, which brings us to the there's a spectrum of trauma. Okay,
Yes.
so you know, one end is being, let's say, mild,
Yes.
in that we're not fully aware of it, and the other end is really intense. So an example,
Like war veterans.
like war veterans, right? So that would be like a post-traumatic stress, right, disorder.
Yeah.
Because it's so active. The event could have happened 20 years ago, but they're having nightmares every night. They're hypervigilant, hypersensitive, so they jump at the littlest sounds, right?
They startle very easily.
They startle very easily. They have emotional outbursts. They have insomnia. They become more and more isolated. They basically get to the point where they can't even function in life. So this trauma is all-consuming.
And it's not resolved, obviously, because when trauma resolves, as you say in the beginning of the program, you know, we have daily memories. Let's say today when we get home, there's going to be a memory. So tomorrow, this memory is going to be a little bit older memory. You know, after 1 week, it's an even older than tomorrow memory. So what I understand is in especially big traumas like PTS, memory doesn't get old. It's like happened today.
Exactly. It gets stored in the present tense.
It doesn't transfer to the old memory part of the brain. It stays fresh now part of the brain.
Every feeling, every thought, every detail of that experience is so active because, again, when it's unprocessed, it's stored in a part of the brain as like a temporary file, and it's in the present moment. So that's why, you know, it could have happened 25 years ago, but it's like it happening today. Okay?
Yes.
Now, the mild aspect of the trauma, right, is when you're not fully aware of it. You know, that's when you were talking about you live in like a pattern. Right?
We have a patient, like I think 2 weeks ago, he came and he had a very interesting story, but to cut it short, he said he's very good at building business, starting business, growing business. All of a sudden something happens and he has bankrupt 4 times. And after 4 times he said, hold on, there's something wrong here, something shouldn't happen this way at least 4 times. So this was repeating scenarios. So we need to find the trauma in this person, most probably.
Absolutely. That's the initial event. Most likely it was financial related, right? Never got processed, and the behavior plays itself out over and over again until you get the lesson, until the learning takes place. In that active state, you can't digest it and assimilate it or learn it, and so you never, you know, learn from experience, and that's why you keep making the same mistake over and over again. You also had another client that didn't even know there was a problem until his friends told him, right? Oh
yeah, that's so true. And that client about a month ago, he came and when someone said he realized that, he said to me that 4 years ago I was extrovert person, fun-loving, getting together with people, organizing events, picnics, and he said one of his friends said you know, you changed a lot last few years. You're not coming to family events, picnics as usual. And he starts thinking, he said, yes, you know, I'm introvert now. I don't want to be with people. I want to stay at home as soon as I finish my work. So that's why he came. He said, what happened to me?
Exactly, and so you could, I would put that as the mild aspect of trauma, but it's still very, it affects your life in a severe way. You just don't have the awareness, the conscious awareness. You're just, you know, living on automatic program, automatic behavior that's coming from a negative event. Most likely, if I had to venture a guess, I would say he was in some sort of social situation that went horribly wrong, and then he avoided people and places and certain situations that might put him in that place again. And, you know, so it's a protective mechanism, isolation.
Yeah.
So, you know, you make sure that that won't ever happen again.
So what kind of psychological disorders trauma can cause?
Okay, so left untreated, okay?
Yes.
Left untreated, then you start moving over time, right? Or depending upon the, like, you know, the type of trauma, left untreated, it can really escalate to post-traumatic stress disorder. And that means
Yes.
basically you've had the symptoms over a month, you know, and so like in acute trauma, acute is like short term, right? You usually resolve it with natural process and all, like we talked earlier, and it's usually gone in a couple of weeks. But when it goes longer than that, then it becomes post-traumatic stress disorder.
Chronic trauma, you mean?
Chronic trauma, you know. Post-traumatic means after a traumatic event, you know. And then, you know, it's very common that people start developing panic attacks,
Yes.
you know, depression, you know. They even will have suicidal thoughts. Now, that freaks a lot of people out because they're like, you know, they're afraid they're going to kill themselves, right? But what's really happening, the way I understand it, is that just tells me how much they're suffering. When death seems like the ultimate escape, you know, to get away from the torture and the suffering, right? That's all that is about. So that means, so that's an indicator that the person won't do it because we're built to survive,
That's
right?
true.
But it's basically an indicator of just how bad the problem is. You know?
Or patient just cannot see any solution at that moment, no light at the end of the tunnel, so helpless, and it is treatable.
It totally is treatable, and that's the thing. Once you treat it, then things change almost immediately.